Principles of training, a simple, small subject. No. Enormous and highly subjective, but we will try to tackle, initially at least, the large principles that I use as a coach and athlete. Just quick background, I have been running for about 30 years now, including college. I have a background in kinesiology with an emphasis on coaching, and also spent some time with an athletic trainer in college learning the sports medicine side, aside from my own navigation of injuries. I've been coaching now for 12 years, 2 in Colorado and 10 here in California. And that's cross country and track and field, including a whole spectrum of athletes as fast as a 4.8 miler a few years ago. And as an athlete, so far have participated in 3 marathons, looking forward to the Boston this coming April. I think this quote by the great Jack Daniels, not the drink, but an exercise scientist, it kind of encompasses the essence of the sport in a technical level, which is that it is actually minimal technical skill required for the sport, unlike many others, but it is almost purely conditioning. And so a lot of grit and things we'll discuss. Not that there isn't technical skill, because that comes into form and how you plan training, but nothing in comparison to other sports. I'm going to highlight what I said, like, are some main foundational points. And this is just an outline, talking about goals, which is a huge part of training, particularly for running. And then as a coach, at least, and this might shy towards more than, I'd say, veteran level. So depends, there's going to be a spectrum from beginners, depending on those goals, to veterans and what their ambitions are. But as a coach, maximizing running form is going to be essential. And that will include things like assessing symmetry and balance, basically running form, and how to apply and reinforce, train that. And then the training itself, which is about fundamentally improving endurance and speed. And I'll define those terms as well, because there's a lot of coaching perspective, there's a lot of running perspective, and unhelpfully, in a sense, they use different terms, sometimes synonymously, sometimes meaning different things. So getting the jargon honed in, it can be tricky. So I'll try to define those so we're clear, at least in this conversation. Goals, I think, are the foundation starting point. That's where I would start with anybody who wanted me to work with them and design a training plan, which is something I offer. So it could be anything. It could be from weight loss to general fitness, wanting to be able to run a certain distance or perform in a race or perform at a certain level in a race. How that individual answers those questions will be the kind of initial compass to how we design training. But desire is fundamentally the most important, wanting to do it. And it's a hard sport to be motivated for in and of itself, even on the best of days, even for a veteran like me at times. But that motivation, some kind of foundation of desire is essential, and understanding, why do I want to run? And sometimes it's finding many reasons over time. It may begin with one and then grow. There's people that start out with the idea of losing weight or general fitness, but then they start making friends in a community of runners. So then it becomes more than just staying fit. It's, oh, I have community and connection. And then you just keep adding on the reasons. And that's what I love to see as a coach, is when someone falls in love with it for all the things it has to offer. But having some fundamental desire is essential to train well, because it'll help motivate you those hard days, those nasty weather days, or those days you just don't feel like it. All ultimately toward training becoming about, I summarize it this way with athletes: our training is about making you comfortable with being uncomfortable. That, I think, encapsulates the idea of conditioning as the heart of distance training or running training. But also delayed gratification, because you don't always see immediate results, or it doesn't feel like it. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. There's a lot of scientific studies about the nature of that physiologically, but delayed gratification is part of the experience. So it's patience, a lot of patience needed. So as a coach, also trying to frame expectations. So if anybody in running, at least, is like, train with me and you'll be this in like 3 weeks, they're probably overselling the training plan. A couple additional factors we discuss in all of that with, like, an individual is the individual's history. What is the person's current fitness? what is his or her running age, and that just means how long have you been running. Someone who's been running for 2 years pretty consistently would be like a 2-year-old, like that's the running age. So like for me, I'm like 30 years, as I've been running for 30 years. If you've had injuries or other health concerns, want to take all those things into consideration when designing a training plan. And then with that, which relates to goals, like what is your desired training regimen? You know, I was talking with someone recently who just wants a basic fit, like basic fitness. And so asking, oh, how many days do you want to dedicate to this? And so she said 3 days, and we work with that and build it around there. So it's very subjective, and how long you want it to be. So the second aspect of maximizing form, this is a lot about both injury prevention and maximizing your energy output from a physiological biomechanics outlet. The latter becomes more important, I think, the more competitive you are. To be faster, you're just sharpening every aspect you can. But the injury prevention aspect is true for anybody, because if you're hurt, you can't run, and then you're not achieving that goal that you had for running to begin with. So looking at things like posture, standing tall, arm motion, like our arms kind of steer our legs, and so the rhythm of the arms and the direction of the arms direct your energy. So they should be ideally going forward, backward in the swing. We look at braking force. How is the foot striking? How's that affecting center of gravity? Again, these things are affecting both speed and injury prevention. And then cadence, 180 steps is a general term. It's plus usually or minus depending on legs and other personal features, but rhythm is essential for economy of energy and speed, all these things. And arms, again, dictate that. Something that, as example, that Daniels writes is that, the slower you take steps, usually the longer you're in the air. So the longer you're in the air, you're just placing your body mass up and hitting the ground down harder versus over. I can notice that even if I'm running on my own at a certain pace versus maybe I'm running with a friend who's much slower to hang out, be a support, my form is changing a bit. And I can sometimes feel more tired or sore actually after that, because I've changed my mechanics. In part, what Daniel's saying, I'm going up in the air a little bit more and landing a bit harder. So a lot of factors, including then pelvic job, how's the side to side motion. This is where Eric and I can partner a lot together, because what happens with injuries then directs towards the physical therapy side. And he and I are both all about preventing injury, ideally. And so that's why we offer, for example, a service, of running form analysis, because it could be just a great starting point of identifying vulnerabilities and trying to prevent it with the more knowledge you have before you get started. Because the more you run, the more the body's stressed, the more those vulnerabilities will become apparent. People can get away with it at a low level, but the higher the volume, the risk injury increases. And as just another note with this, all of these things, posture, arm motion, braking force, etc., those are available for free on our website. The running form analysis is a service, but I break down these things, and then the application drills are available for free on the website under running principles. Just talking about things like pre-running warm-up, general drills that help reinforce mechanics, and core exercises that help with breathing, posture, strength in general. Supplemental drills based on vulnerabilities. Something we're developing to start in the new year is what we're calling for now a healthy runner sort of program. So we have a lot for injured athletes currently, but also providing things that after you identify potential vulnerabilities, some things you can do on your own virtually on the website that are just going to guide you, different exercises, drills, things like that. And then of course, stretching is an application of that, just to help blood flow, relax the muscles, and improve their flexibility, which not only helps with injury prevention, but can also have benefits for performance and speed. And so moving more towards some of the more application principles of training itself, for some, speed might need to be developed, but most often I see speed is there, it's the endurance that has to be developed. Basically, a lot of people can run fast for a short distance, And the training is just prolonging how long you can go at that pace. So someone might start, I can run this pace for a quarter mile, but then I get tired. Training then extends that to maybe you can run that pace for now 5K relative to goals again. But endurance is one of the foundational aspects of training and distance running. But that isn't at the exclusion of speed either. Getting a little more into some of the technical aspects, as a coach, as I approach training, endurance and speed are going to be two of the key realms, you could say. How we train them, the specific workouts, is going to vary completely based on goals and history. But here are some basic principles, at least. If you think about a cycle of training, it could be a year, it could be 3 months. That's also subjective. So this is just a guide. It's not rigid, and there's a lot of flexibility, but it's a good principle, I think. And that is, and we'll break some of these terms down again, but base training is going to be the majority of that cycle, which is just building up the mileage. Again, I'll talk about that soon because it's kind of related to easy running, we'll call it. Then you have tempo running, which is kind of next level. Sharpening is at the highest. You're the most volume of running, highest intensity. And then this more applies to if you're racing than if you're just general fitness, but tapering, and you have your goal race and then the recovery period. Tapering is basically you're reducing how much you're running while maintaining the intensity. It's an art and a science with a lot of variables. And I just encourage athletes with recovery, if you're going through a cycle, you can't just inevitably, you can't like in a linear sense, just keep going. You need cycles of intensity to go up and then down to recover. And that's true in microcosms as well, as we'll talk about with periodization, but that's true even in the whole sense of a cycle. I think it's important for a mental break. Someone can't just be racing nonstop. They need breaks, low intensity, low stakes, but also the body needs the recovery. But I do encourage athletes generally to recover. Might be a heavy reduction of miles. It might be taking a week off, up to 10 days. It's generally said that 2 weeks off. If you don't run for 2 weeks, you basically have lost all your conditioning. That's a general idea. It sucks because it takes 3 to 6 weeks to build up a base of conditioning, but you can lose it really fast. So to economize your time, prevent injury, maintaining at least something can be really valuable. So now getting into principles of the training itself and its specificity, and this encompasses a truth quite well. If you don't push yourself at all, you're not going to adapt and get stronger. But you do it too hard, too fast, you're going to possibly break, basically, get injured from the shock. Their adaptation is the science of training, and so that's what we're going to get into a little bit. So there's a lot of different terms used. The more scientific is periodization, just meaning that there are stages, and so it's a bit. I'm kind of considering it's a combination of progression and adaptation. There are a lot of different theories and ways to approach what that looks like specifically, but the point at least is that as you're making progress, you are allowing recovery aspects along the way so that your body can adapt. I have become a proponent for most of my coaching career of non-linear periodization, which just means that you're bringing in all the elements at once as opposed to just doing slow long runs and then eventually adding those tempo runs and then eventually adding those max interval runs. The nature of those is progressing in a linear sense, but I try to encourage some kind of speed work at different levels all along so that the body is adapted and ready for it. So it's going to start small in the early base stages. It might just be some fartleks, some strides at the end, nothing long, nothing too intense, but it is keeping those faster twitch muscles and just the body in general ready and adapted so that when it does get more intense with the interval training, it's going to be a smoother transition. Again, some of this is going to be more for people going after specific pace goals, but I think even in a holistic sense for preventing injury and other things, people with general fitness, mixing in a little bit of that is wise. General principle also, the 10% idea is a guideline. There's definitely room for pushing that beyond 10%. It just again depends on various factors. There's different ways to progress. I have done a number, like for example, progressing 10% 3 weeks in a row. Like 1 week is at a number, second week is 10% more, third week is 10% more than that. And then the fourth week kind of taper, like a mini taper, I go down as a recovery. That can work. But I think increasingly seeing the value, I saw this more with the team this fall, as that there seem to be lower injuries, not necessarily only affected by this, but I think others are proponents of this, and it makes sense. But keeping for 3 weeks in a row the same mileage, and then increasing 3 weeks, and then increasing 3 weeks, I think maybe slightly better, but again, there's subjectivity to that. So as we said, delayed gratification is a major part of the training paradigm. And generally it's said that it's about 6 weeks that you really see the benefits of a particular session. So when you're racing, that has to be very much planned in the calendar so that the body is ready at the right time. It's important to note that in the beginning, you're going to see the most gains, or feel like you have the most gains, like in terms of ratio, numeric. Later on, the gains are going to be shrinking. Doesn't mean you don't keep improving. It's just the nature of adaptation. And that could be for just a cycle. You have a cycle, you complete it, the next year that starts anew and you're at a different level. So, and the body has to be pushed. So if you adapt and get to another level, just like that previous quote said, you have to then push it to the next threshold to continue to improve. If you stay, easy is going to be relative depending on where you're at. And that's going to keep changing the more developed you get as a runner. Another important just idea to keep in mind is soreness is going to usually be the worst 2 days out. So that can influence how recovery plans are scheduled. But the next day, there is still a high risk of injury. So depending on the runner's age will influence how that training paradigm is. Sometimes you can do 2 intense workouts in a row, but that's usually more advanced runners. And again, it depends on whether it's a workout, what the nature of the workout is, or if it's a race, how you plan those recoveries. But the soreness, delayed onset muscle fatigue usually hits the hardest 2 days after a really hard effort. Couple of notes for different climates, especially heat. It's generally said that it takes about 2 weeks for the body to adapt to high heat. So like this fall here in the South Bay, we had about 10 days of 100+ degrees weather, and that required a lot of adaptation of the plan, because the reality is that heat, the body has to adapt to it. It's doing so much to the body so that the body keeps cool. That's also then going to be depleting the muscles from oxygen, possibly blood flow, a lot of different things. And so if you try to just push on like there's nothing that has changed, injury risk is increasing by a lot. Not to mention overheating risk, dehydration, which aren't mutually exclusive or dependent on each other. You can overheat while being hydrated or dehydrated. You can be dehydrated and not be overheating. But that's just a side thing. There's other environmental factors that can be considered in training, like altitude and other weather, but heat is a particularly rough one on the body, and so it has to be taken into consideration. So I wanted to just focus on, in the sort of end of this, 2 kind of key workout domains, you could say, and then a couple examples, subdomains, you would say. So one is, as I've said, endurance is a big workout type. The goal being to run long and slow and to do progressively more. It's basically building your workload capacity. So that base training is building up how much can my body handle. And so endurance runs can be anything from the warm-up to a long run, and everything in between, how you approach it. With a week training plan, the long run is usually, or should usually be, about 25-30%, not more. You can get away with it sometimes, but on average, that's a safe, good margin for the long run of the week. That's going to be relative to your week mileage goal. So if you have 20 miles as your goal for the week, that would mean if you have a long run in it, you want to do it 4 to 5 miles. And generally it's keeping at a 60 to 70% heart rate, so it's not max. If it's just an endurance focused long run. Now, there are long runs where you can include other aspects that we'll talk about, but for just the purely endurance training aspect, it's keeping within aerobic capacity. And a good guide to that is basically a 3-3 breathing rhythm, meaning you take 3 steps inhaling and 3 steps exhaling. This is a good general guide. It's not universal, depends on how fit someone is, but it's a good general rule that if you, or some would say, if you can have a conversation, then you're running at an easy pace. If you can't, you might be running a bit faster than an easy pace, and are therefore testing some other aspects of physiology. The other part being speed, again, more important for people racing or trying to hit certain time goals. So we've talked about tempo as a term. It's a kind of an all-inclusive term for a lot of different types of workouts, but it's about sustaining a higher rate of output versus power, which is more about how far is each step getting you, kind of the muscle power, the explosive force. So tempo is like all the systems working in a way, whereas in power is more specifically in a simplistic way, how much that those muscles are able just to get you forward. They work together, but they're slightly different system or aspects of training. So you can think of tempo as just training that race pace, for example, with certain intervals, kind of thinking of it as training for that first half of the race in particular, where power can be developed from running, of course, but biking develops power in the legs and muscles, weightlifting, appropriate, designed weightlifting, stair climbing, plyometrics are great. Plyometrics help also, in just the body mechanics and form. But with running, hills definitely are a great tool, a universal traditional tool for building that power. It's generally said that a good hill repeat workout is kind of the same as a good leg lift workout, leg day. And there's a lot of different ways of doing that and approaches, but principally hills have to become our friends to succeed in competitive distance running, at least. So I want to talk about 3 different types of tempo and power, basically speed development workouts. So threshold's the slowest of the 3 interval styles, and it's going to be comfortably hard. It's comfortably hard because it's generally staying within the aerobic capacity. So it's about 10% of the weekly mileage, and you're just building that lactic threshold. Lactic acid is created when you don't have enough oxygen and in the muscles and have that burning sensation. So it's just developing those systems. VO2, volume of oxygen, it's basically race pace effort, 8% of the weekly mileage, so less than tempo. And you're building that aerobic capacity of your lungs and your oxygen delivery to the body. So development of heart rate and the metabolic processes of getting energy down and pushing that lactic threshold. Finally, repetitions, race pace or faster. They're the least amount of volume in the week, but the fastest. And you're just developing the economy. You're improving, you're sharpening your mechanics, and just the systems are being maximized to their limit. And so, and just psychologically becoming comfortable with faster speeds. Couple just additional subjects just to note at the end. Training includes a lot of things also, like nutrition, which is its own huge subject, which we'll hopefully have a nutritionist in the future to talk. Psychology is a huge subject of all of it, and running shoe selection. This is a book that is a great resource if you want to really delve into choosing running shoes. I helped edit this book, and so it's a great resource, simple and practical.